Welcome everyone. Glad to have you here. We are presenting our panel today, IoT Security, Don't Connect Without It. On our panel we have a couple of guys here. We have Sam Lucero here on the far left, who is our senior, not our, but the senior principal analyst, M2M and IoT at IHS. He's a seasoned industry analyst with 15 years of experience analyzing the telecom and networking technology markets, and is currently lead analyst for IHS Markets Wireless WAN IoT coverage. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
And then right next to me we have Rob Basil, co-founder and chief network officer here at Ingenu. And he has 25 years experience in the wireless space, and also one of his roles is security on the network. So thanks, Rob, for being here.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Great. And I'm the moderator, Mike. I'm principal data scientist here at Ingenu. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. One of the reasons we wanted to have this panel was the fact that IoT security is something that's talked about quite a bit. It's written about a lot. And we saw a need to talk about it maybe in a rigorous way, and in a way that describes what it is and why it's important. And we have a lot of customers and others who ask us about it, and we wanted to have an opportunity to clarify for them all about IoT security. So that's why we're all here. So thank you for being here. We'll go ahead and jump right into our first question, and we'll start with you, Rob.
Okay.
What is IoT security?
So the way I think about it in simple terms, IoT security is all about protecting all the forms of data associated with an IoT solution. Obviously, there are devices in an IoT solution. They're sending and receiving data. They're providing sensor data, or they're providing control of a thing as part of that IoT solution. But there's other forms of data as well. Devices have IDs, and those are associated with owners. The owner is the ultimate beneficiary of an IoT solution, and the owner also has important data that needs to be protected. They likely have a subscription with an IoT connectivity solution, so they have payment data on how they're paying for that subscription. They're also participating in an onboarding process and claiming their devices, so they have security data around authorization codes and things like that to manage their devices. So the owner has important data to protect as well. One aspect that I'd like to point out, because I think it's a key feature of IoT security going forward, is really the identity of the owner of devices that are participating in the IoT solution. Think of a asset tracking solution where monitoring location of pallets of a company's product being shipped out of a port. What we want to do is protect whose data that is, so a competitor can't go and glean information about how much product a competitor is shipping, for instance, and use that information against them. So identity of the owners is critically important as well. And the last key piece I'd like to point out is data that's used to protect these other forms of data. So key material, account credentials, things like that, which is really the most important in the sense that if that data gets breached, an attacker can now perhaps participate in attacking vulnerability and go undetected for some period of time.
Yeah, they can get all their other data that is on that system. So just to summarize real quick what you're saying is, so you said IoT security is protecting all forms of IoT data, whether that's the actual data that's being collected by the device, or the owner data, so who actually owns the device or is running the device, including payment information, other stuff, and then the security data itself, which would allow access to the system, whether it's through the device or other stuff. Okay, great. Sam, so what is IoT security and why is it important?
Well, so Rob went into a lot of great detail. From my perspective, IoT security is provisioning trust, confidentiality, safety, privacy, accessibility to the devices and data that make up an IoT solution. So it's a very multifaceted concept, right? I mean, we want to be sure that devices that are connecting to our IoT solution are in fact devices that we authorize and want to be connected. We want to make sure that devices that are authorized are booting up and behaving in an expected manner. We want to be sure that data is confidential and private, both at rest on devices as well as in motion between devices and devices in the cloud. And we want to be sure that we have access to the solution. So all of those are very important pieces of a full comprehensive IoT solution.
Okay, great, thank you. So I like that you said it was provisioning trust, right? Security is what allows us to trust that the data that we're getting and the operations that are being performed are ones we actually intended, right? And there are aspects to making sure that you have that trust in place. So,
absolutely.
Very nice. Okay, great. Both of you hit on the idea of protection, and that IoT security is protecting data. Sam, I guess we'll start with you on this one. What is protection? And yeah, what's been your experience, I guess, as far as protection in IoT security?
Sure. So protection involves a wide range of technologies, systems, and processes, many of which Rob mentioned. So, for example, encryption and public key infrastructure, identity and access management, heuristic analysis, and so on. So, at a fundamental level, IT security, traditional IT security, and IoT security share many of the same underlying goals and even many of the same technologies. However, there are some very crucial differences in how those technologies are implemented, or the challenges faced in actually using those technologies for an IoT solution. So some of those complicating factors would include, for instance, the scale and diversity of devices in an IoT solution, the risk profile in an IoT solution, or the operational management of an IoT solution. So, for example, maybe to use smart meters as one quick example, utilities moved from a model of millions of non-communicating meters being read once a month or once a quarter, once a year even, to a smart grid paradigm where suddenly they have millions of connected devices out in the field, and they have data that's being brought in on a 15-minute interval or daily interval. And so not only do they have these tremendous responsibilities around the protection of those end devices, but now they have to deal with a flood of data coming in that they have to secure. So examples abound in multiple industries, and another key point, that I mentioned around the risk profile is that in traditional IT security, organizations may run risks around maybe financial data is lost or customer privacy is compromised. In many IoT scenarios, life and limb can be at risk. If your Jeep Cherokee can be controlled by a third party and you're barreling down the freeway and suddenly it's swerved on you, you can be in a rollover situation. So that risk profile can be quite a bit more severe potentially.
Yeah, I like the distinction, because that really is what makes it the IoT. It's the Internet of Things. And those things are physical, real-world objects. Sometimes they're just sensors, right? Sometimes it's just a humidity reading and maybe temperature or something benign like that. But sometimes it could be part of a SCADA system, or it could be, like you said, controlling the Jeep or other things. And these are they are in the real world and therefore have real-world implications, as opposed to, like you pointed out, just the financial loss, which obviously is terrible, and we don't want that.
Sure.
But I think we can agree that making sure that we don't hurt anyone is very important. So anyway, sorry I interrupted you. I just thought that was a really, really solid point. Was there anything else there?
No.
All right, great, cool. Rob?
Yeah, so on types of protection, I think Sam covered the space pretty well. One particular aspect I'd like to point out is what we call data integrity. That is that authorized senders are sending data to authorized receivers and vice versa. That's obviously important to prevent man-in-the-middle type of attacks where data can be altered. In the example that Sam pointed out, a breach of that vulnerability would allow, say, a meter customer to say that they're not using very much energy, which it is ultimately a cost to the IoT solution user in that case. But data integrity also provides, I think, another important aspect that is getting a lot of attention in the IoT space, and that is an attack, say like a toaster. Maybe there's not interesting information on a toaster, but if it's used as a leveraging point to attack a more critical asset in the home, it might be the homeowner's home computer with banking information, et cetera. In an enterprise situation, can be even more serious. But a key side benefit of data integrity and only talking to authorized senders is kind of this concept of don't talk to strangers. If an entity is trying to speak with you and can't provide the proper digital signature that this is a valid message from a trusted source, simply don't talk to them. And it really cuts off at the entry point a lot of these types of attacks that could potentially be propagated from seemingly benign devices to more serious breaches of information loss.
Yeah, it keeps that propagation from happening. And also, I think to me, that highlights so the ability to if you don't allow anybody in talking on your network who shouldn't be there, it also prevents things like, I always like this example, the replay attack, where you just sniff a packet that you happen to be nearby when, say, a street light is turned off by the city. Let's say it's a wireless smart street light, and you happen to be nearby and you sniff it and you figure out what the packet is. And let's say it's encrypted, right? A lot of people, when they think IoT security, think encryption, and they kind of stop at encryption. Well, you can take that encrypted packet, and if it doesn't have this authentication authorization, you just replay it, right? So you capture the one that gets played when the lights are turned on, and you capture the one that gets played when they're turned off. And then you got the keys to the kingdom, right? You can drive around the city just having a lot of fun, right? And to turn things. And it can be encrypted the whole time. You have no idea what it says in there. All you know is if I send this encrypted packet, it'll do what you want it to do. So that's really, I think, highlights the importance of authorization and authentication as opposed to only encryption.
Yeah, absolutely. And it needs to be done on a message by message basis. Some of the IoT devices, they're very power sensitive in a sense. And so things like connection state and things like that that are common in the IT space may be too costly from a power standpoint to maintain. So every single message needs an individual signature, individually authenticated, and that's an important aspect.
Awesome. Well, very good. Okay, so we kind of summarized integrity and the importance of making sure that you're only talking to those that you should be talking to. Don't talk to strangers, I guess, is an important thing on the IoT as well. And then, Sam, we summarized earlier about the difference between IT versus IoT, and that it's real world things that are impacted here with IoT. I thought that was a really, really good difference between these two. Okay, so we've established, I think, that protection is important and what types of protection are important. So ultimately, or not ultimately, but who is responsible for providing that protection? How does that protection get implemented? Rob, do you mind starting us off there?
Sure. So clearly the technology that's providing the IoT connectivity has to support these protection mechanisms inherently in the way it's designed and built. But that's not the end of the story. The module makers also need to deploy processes and procedures for the chain of custody of security information as it transitions from factory provisioning to delivery to home networks where these devices will ultimately be deployed. So module makers cooperating with operators need to perform their role in ensuring IoT solution security. The network equipment makers, the access points that are out in the field providing the connectivity itself, not only do they need the over-the-air security, but they need many of the concepts that come from the IT security space in general, things around physical security, leveraging the best practices around IP nodes and how they operate securely in a wide area. And so leveraging a lot of those techniques, both within the infrastructure equipment itself and within the operator space. Operators can deploy equipment and technology that's been very designed with security in mind, but then they also need their own processes and best practices. Simple things like password strings, policy around security, how often you do patch security updates for Linux distributions, things like that. And so operators play also a very important role in layering in the security on top of the technology and the devices.
Okay, great. So you started with a connectivity provider, right? They have to lay, they're sort of the foundation, right? That's the data pipe. You know, data enters in, and it's got to be safe all the way through until it gets to the other side. And within that, you talk about the module maker, and that's where it actually the data starts to go through the pipe, right, in the module itself, and then the network equipment makers. And I thought it was interesting you talked about the network equipment makers. That's sort of where the IoT connects to the internet, right? That's because it is now traveling via IP, right? Is that, have I understood properly?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, the typical model devices are in the field, whether they're a source of sensor data or some form of control or status. They're ultimately working with, in conjunction with, an application that lives on the internet, in the cloud typically, to provide an overall end-to-end solution. So those devices are ultimately in the field, and they're of course connected to the internet and make it to kind of the cloud application that kind of centralizes the value of the IoT solution. So, yeah, the network connectivity piece is the gateway, more or less, to the IP network.
Okay, awesome. And Sam, you've dealt with a lot of different companies. You've been doing this for a number of years. You've talked to lots of different people. So you've actually had firsthand exposure to a lot of these providers, a lot of the solution providers, as well as in the cellular space, cellular providers. So you've been able to interact with lots of different parties. So yeah, who is responsible to provide protection, and what's been your experience there?
Well, I think Rob provided a lot of great detail already. I mean, taking a step back, I mean, certain situations will entail regulated responsibility, right? So in a range of industries, from financial services to healthcare to energy provisioning, probably soon in the automotive sector, the responsible party is going to be a regulated concept. But on top of that, and sort of as a superset of that, every organization that is contemplating an IoT deployment is going to have to assess its own risk for that deployment. And if they are vulnerable to significant harm and damage, or if the organization could even potentially be put out of business as a result of an IoT security breach, then ultimately responsibility is going to lie with that organization to evaluate and remediate their own risk. Now, fortunately, the wider IoT ecosystem, as Rob has mentioned, provides a great deal of resources and help in addressing the IoT security challenge as organizations make that journey. So ecosystem stakeholders and players such as, well, obviously security technology vendors, general ICT vendors and communication service providers, as Rob mentioned, consultants and system integrators, even industry organizations, whether they're industry specific or security specific in their focus, can be valuable resources. So the IoT ecosystem itself is very aware of the need to help companies and organizations along this journey towards a safer, more secure Internet of Things.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is that you're not, if you're one company trying to implement an IoT solution or leverage the IoT somehow in your business, that you're not alone. Like, you don't need to be necessarily the entire expert. You need to be aware, and I think a lot of our viewers are aware that it's important. Maybe they don't know all the details about IoT security. So you're saying that there are firms, probably like yours and others, that actually help assess and walk you through that process and make sure that you're performing what you should perform when it comes to security on your own solution. Is that right?
That's a very good summation. IoT security is very complex, and there's a lot of interested parties that can help you on that journey. So
Okay.
You don't need to go it alone.
All right, great. And I think you both honed in also on the idea of having policies and procedures in place, and you mentioned, Sam, specifically regulations, so that governments and other governing bodies that are generally responsible also will have a role in making sure that good policies are in place and that there's a standard, something that you can benchmark against, so that yeah, I am doing okay, and you don't have to come up with that standard yourself. It's something you can mark yourself against and know you're doing okay. Excellent. All right, so for our next question, I guess, Sam, I think this probably ties right into what you were just talking about. How do we being sort of, the solution provider, those wanting to implement an IoT solution, how do they and we know that the security actually works, that it's going to perform and it's going to do its job in protecting data?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, there are no guarantees, right? But there are a number of things that we can do to at least increase the chance that we have a secure IoT solution. So actions such as security by design, right-sizing the investment to the risk profile. I'll mention a couple and then go into some more detail.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But defense in depth of the solution. Ensuring a trust chain, a root of trust in the devices that we deploy, heuristic analysis, and ensuring intertrustability between those parts of the solution that we directly control and those parts that intersect with other stakeholders in our own ecosystem, in terms of getting that solution to market. So, taking a step back and circling back on the first, as we've alluded to, IoT security is a complex undertaking, and it's going to be more successful, more optimal, if we have the opportunity to design in security from the start as part of a unified infrastructure, rather than deploy our IoT solution and then try to bolt on pieces after the fact.
Some things can't be done unless you design them from the very beginning, or at least without terrible surgery, right? I mean,
exactly.
You don't want to insert an organ into a body that you should have had, and then later have to go in and perform surgery to insert that organ. It doesn't work. It's sort of maybe a more anthropomorphic analogy for it. But sorry, I interrupted you. But yeah, you don't want to.
Good metaphor. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, and so defense in depth. IoT devices are often deployed out in the field. In contrast to traditional IT security, there's much less of an opportunity for a defendable border. And so we want to make sure that we are securing different aspects of the solution, devices, and providing segmentation between groups of devices, for instance, just to try to increase the robustness so that if any one aspect is compromised, we at least have a better chance that the whole solution doesn't come tumbling around our ears. In terms of the root of trust, Rob went into great detail in terms of needing to really understand the identity of devices trying to interact with our solution. And the gold standard in the industry is a hardware-based root of trust, right? A trusted platform module or a similar type of hardware-based solution. But again, with the idea of right-sizing the solution to the risk profile, it may be that a trusted execution environment or even a software implementation might be adequate in certain situations. But being able to have a chain of trust is important. Heuristic analysis gets back to that idea that IoT is a borderless situation, and rather than trying to rely on a firewall, an intrusion protection system, which might be perfectly adequate in an IT security scenario, being able to look at the behavior of devices in the IoT solution and pull out anomalous behavior, identify it, and respond to it is a critical action. And then finally, the intertrustability is essentially to do with the idea that in many, if not most, IoT solutions, we're going to have other third-party stakeholders as ongoing participants in our solution. So we're going to have device manufacturers that have their own device cloud. We may have solution providers that have various clouds for managing other aspects of the solution. And essentially, we need to make sure that all of these stakeholders can interoperate, intercommunicate in a secure, trusted manner.
Awesome. So, I wanted to just clarify to make sure I understand. When you say heuristic analysis, is that the real-time analysis you're talking about to make sure that things are operating and looking for anomalous behavior? Is that what you mean when you say heuristic analysis?
That's exactly it. I mean, to give a somewhat extreme example, if you had a street lamp, a street light that is, for instance, has a SIM, right? And the SIM is suddenly, you realize that it's making calls, international calls. You have a pretty good indication that something's wrong. And so being able to just really understand and have visibility into how the solution is operating, how the devices are communicating, really gives you an opportunity to respond to things that should not be happening under a normal, expected operational state.
Oh, great. Thank you for clarifying. Rob, all right, so how do we know it works? How do we being the solution provider and others that are participating, how do they know the security is working?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of leveraging, some of the concepts that Sam brought up. I think you need to design, for the right thing. And so a party that's looking to deploy an IoT solution should be asking its partners and vendors, what design principles have you used in designing the product that you're offering me? You should start to hear some of the security standards and security buzzwords. You should hear things like NIST approved algorithms for security. You should hear things like open web application security program. You should hear these sorts of things in the entity that's selling you a service, that they've considered these things. Moreover, even though they may have designed something the right way, did they test it? If it's a service that's on the web, it needs to be tested. A company that's offering a product in the IoT solution space should be performing this testing for two reasons. They should be performing it so that they can improve their own product. They need to be testing it continuously. There are various ways to do this. You can, of course, do it internally. We can also do third-party penetration testing. You can enlist a friendly entity like a university to and provide a reward for them to actually test and try and break your security in an environment that represents production. Things like this on a recurring, regular basis, I think, are important things to ask of a vendor that you might be using for your IoT solution. Ultimately, the vendor is going to say very nice things, probably about the way they handle security, and so kind of the gold standard, so to speak, is a third-party audit or attestation from someone skilled in the space to come forward and say, we've performed these testings, we've performed this audit of the operational procedures, etc., and here is the report that proves that, yes, they are not only have designed the security properly, they've implemented these processes and they practice them on an ongoing basis. And so I think if you're an entity that's looking, again, to deploy an IoT solution, these are a number of things I think you can ask of your vendor, and you should get solid answers.
Okay, so Rob, I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Do you do these things?
Absolutely. I couldn't say these things if I expected that question. if we didn't do them, and so it's an ongoing, regular process as part of the services and products that Ingenu offers. But
all right. So I just want to break those down because I like the framework or the way that you said it. So. You both talked about designing for security, but beyond designing, you need to implement security. And then, it's nice to have something up and running, but how well does it work, right? And to know that, you have to test and actually test that security. So, and Rob, you said a very specific sort of gold standard way to know is to actually ask for audit reports,
mm-hmm.
and that will tell you everything that they did and how they tested it, and how well it was designed, implemented, and how it performed in the test. And Sam, I thought one of the great things that you brought up was just the fact that you need to right size your investment and make sure that you're investing in IoT in a way that is appropriate for, I guess, your security profile and the risks to your company, and making sure that it makes sense for what you're doing. Well, fantastic. So our last question before we get into the Q&A session is really just sort of, is there any other advice or recommendations that you have for folks that are providing solutions or otherwise leveraging the IoT solution? Rob, do you mind starting us off?
Sure. Despite the things we've talked about, and your best efforts to assure that these things don't happen, it's imperative that you prepare for the possibility that they might or will happen. So what does that mean? That means having techniques, much as Sam mentioned, to detect a problem. Again, no matter what links you went to, you may actually have a problem. You need to detect it. You need to isolate it to a device, a piece of infrastructure equipment, a service on the web. And you need to identify it, and you need to quarantine it quickly. You need a response to isolate the attack so that it does not propagate further into the system, and you limit the damage. That's critical, and moreover, I think with the IoT space, not only do you have to prepare for the worst, but you have to prepare for the worst for a much longer period of time, I think, than we're used to with non-IoT solutions. Some of these solutions may be deployed for 10, 15, 20 years, and attackers are going to evolve their techniques and methods to exploit vulnerabilities. And so you need to be prepared to be continuously advancing your technology, and that means security patches, not only the stuff inside the data center, not only inside infrastructure points, but the end devices themselves, the firmware that runs on the radio modules, the firmware that runs on the say application plane, if you will. Those things need to be security patchable if they're going to survive in the field for 20 years, because today's attacks will not be the same down the road.
So sort of future-proofing. And when you say security patchable, what does that mean for a connectivity provider like yourself? What kind of capabilities?
Great question. So you need the ability, and imagine a network with 100 million IoT devices on it. You need the ability to update all 100 million devices with a security patch, and that is a critical feature that Ingenu has deployed around patch updates on a broadcast method to a large number of devices, so that you can again keep pace with the attack and threat environment that may be out there.
Okay, great, thank you. It's important. Okay, Sam, advice, recommendations for those who want to employ IoT solutions?
Well, I'll just simply reiterate that there is a tremendous amount of help available from the larger ecosystem, and companies really should not go it alone. There's tremendous help and assistance available.
Great. All right. So yeah, no need to go out there and be a loner. There are people who think about this problem a lot and can help you out and work with your solution. Great. Sounds good. Well, with that, thank you, gentlemen. We'll turn to our questions. I know questions have been streaming in for the audience. Thank you for your questions so far. I'm just going to be reading them off of a monitor here that has been populated with the questions. Okay, so if wireless connections are generally secure, what can IoT device providers do to keep devices safe in case of physical access? Anybody? Rob?
So, I think, and Sam mentioned this to a degree. I mean, to get real specific, a device probably has some sort of application processor or some sort of microcontroller that is providing kind of the root of the service, whether it's sensor data or control. You need to look for, and it's becoming more and more popular at lower and lower cost points, microcontrollers and processors that have secure trust zones within the silicon themselves, so that so you're not exposing critical information on the pins of a device. It can be probed or something like that. Look very much for microprocessors and controllers that have security built in. That is a big aspect of what at the end of the day is pretty much physical security. Various industries have been operating in this environment for a long time. What's happening in the IoT space is that the price point for these is coming down lower and lower. And I think as Sam identified, if the risk is such that, and the benefit of preventing such a risk is worth it, you should consider, say, something, a processor that has that kind of capability.
Okay.
As an example.
No, yeah, no, that's a very, very concrete, solid. There are other things, it sounds like, but that's a good, solid, concrete example.
Yeah, around the, the overall mechanical structure of the device and things like that. I mean, obviously, you don't expose things like serial ports and other diagnostic information that makes it easy to get into the device from outside. Things like tamper-proofing and things like that can, again, cost-benefit trade-off, but where a device can alert that something's not right, someone's opened me up, whatever, and at least have that hint that, maybe I should watch what this device is doing going forward because something wasn't right. If it's power cycled unnecessarily, this would be an example of a kind of a power device that has an unnatural power cycling profile to it. That would be another indication that let's flag this device and watch it. We'll watch its traffic pattern, see if it's doing anything unusual.
Yeah, that goes back to the heuristic analysis you were talking about, Sam. Yeah, anything
Exactly.
you wanted to add to what Rob was saying?
No, that was a comprehensive response. So.
Yeah. All right, cool, great. Okay, next question. What kind of authentication is used in most IoT devices?
We'll take a shot there. I mean, I think highly varied. I think there are a number of types of authentication. The standard is, from kind of the public key infrastructure side of things, you can leverage digital signature techniques and things like that. However, it's a lot of bits, it's a lot of overhead, it's maybe some expensive software. So I think what I've seen in the IoT space is various technologies have gone off and implemented something that's just as secure but a little less expensive. And so Ingenu, for example, which I can speak about, every single message is signed with a 128-bit signature, which is pretty strong in the security space. The techniques in there are based on standard NIST algorithms like AES, etc. But not all of the solutions out there provide the same bit length and same algorithmic kind of approach. So what you see is a little bit of a hodgepodge. Some of them may be very valid for the right cost point. Others may not. But the important thing is that it's built into the protocol. It's attached to every message. It's a solid algorithm that is NIST approved, and that you use it all the time.
Okay, great. So, and just for our viewers, if you want some more detail on the various, authentication bit rates and things, you can actually download our ebook, The Making of RPMA, and I believe it goes through that for ours as well as some of the other connectivity providers. So anyway, check that out, and that should help you answer that question. Sam, anything you want to add to that?
Not really. Public key infrastructure, as Rob mentions, is a key underpinning. It can be a third-party provided solution with third-party certificates. Organizations can establish their own key infrastructure, but that really is a quite robust level of authentication for IoT applications.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Okay, so next question is, what are the greatest weak points in any IoT solution? The human element, like we've seen with Apple's iCloud breaches? So the question is the human element the ultimate weak point, or is it some other thing that's the weakest part of an IoT IoT solution? Sam, any thoughts on that?
Well, just in a very broad brush response, I think the human element is implicated in many instances, whether that's a failure of design of the solution at the start, whether it's the programming bugs, so the rule of thumb is there's 15 to 25 bugs in every 1,000 line of code. So, or more specifically, yes, if there's a human engineering type attack to the solution, all of those can be very damaging. there's such a wide variety of types of IoT solutions that to really try to identify one vector of threat as being the most problematic, I think is very difficult.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, there are a lot of different attack vectors, so that makes total sense. Rob, anything to add?
I think I agree with Sam. I mean, I think the human element is a risk at various stages of the the delivery of the IoT solution. And if I had to give a one-word answer to is the human element the weakest point, I'd probably say yes. Algorithms are secure to the extent that you protect the key material, and key material is usually made available via a human error, a human mistake, or a lapse in process.
Yeah, so to go back to the framework you talked about earlier about designing, implementing, and then testing, it's really, when you're testing, you're making sure it was implemented properly, right? And who implements? We do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe in that framework, perhaps that's the response is, did we convert what we know theoretically to real life in an appropriate way?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. How long has Ingenu been deploying these security practices? I guess we mentioned some there. How long has Ingenu been deploying these?
So Ingenu has a long history of deploying private networks, largely for the utility space, and we found that of the various IoT solution customers out there, the utility industry is one of the toughest when it comes to security. So we've been deploying networks since 2010 with big name utilities in the U.S. and internationally, again, security hasn't stood still since then. We've continued to advance it and improve it, but networks have been operating commercially and publicly since the 2010 timeframe in the utility space.
I wanted just to add, so I actually have some background in security and risk management in a prior life, and I have to know some of the standards that we support are ones where they're federally mandated for those who provide energy and other utilities, and they could be fined, these utilities, if they weren't compliant with these standards. They could be fined up to $1 million a day. So I like saying that because it's important to emphasize just how much trust paying customers have put into RPMA and what Ingenu does. So I don't know, $1 million, it's a lot of money to lose in a day and multiple days if it doesn't work and it's not compliant. So anyway, that was sort of an Ingenu focused question. I don't know if you had any any insight into how long Ingenu has been doing this stuff. Probably not. So I think we have time for one more question. All right. So Sam, you talked earlier about the Jeep Cherokee thing. What about when the intruder uses a benign sensor to get into that Jeep Cherokee control system, like the toaster example Rob talked about? It seems to me that IoT security is going to, is that different? Okay, sorry. So yeah, what about with maybe clarify or elaborate more on the propagation where you've got some sort of, the vector happens to be a weak link and then it can propagate throughout. Either of you want to hit that?
I'll just briefly say, I mean, this gets to the complexity issue of IoT security. Co-located systems, devices, logically co-located even, can provide avenues that make it very difficult to ascertain where an intruder might get in. It might be completely unexpected because they are coming in through what you would initially think is a very benign vector, a very benign source. So again, that's where the security by design and really kind of taking a step back at the outset and trying to understand how all the pieces fit together and how they can be secured is a best practice rather than trying to bolt on after the fact, because that bolt-on is going to leave you much more vulnerable to missing things like the benign sensor that becomes a back door into your solution. Okay, great. Rob, did you have anything to add before we close out?
Just one comment on that, that I think that kind of can exacerbate that problem is kind of the, more of the concept of peer-to-peer networks versus kind of a star sort of communication technology, which I think a lot of the LPWA technologies are kind of more in the star space, but we saw a lot of peer-to-peer mesh type-based technologies in the past, and so just an observation. Those kind of technologies are still out there, and the security challenge is just that much greater in kind of a peer-to-peer network versus a centralized concept.
So just the structure of say, a wide area network like cellular or RPMA or some of the other solutions, that helps alleviate some of those issues.
It simplifies since you have a trusted connection point for devices and sensors to communicate through.
Okay, great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a real treat. You've done great answering these questions on the fly. These are on the fly, so excellent job. I want to also say that we do have a white paper, IoT security, and if you have any questions, we give some recommendations there, and we will answer the questions that we didn't get to in a response. So if you signed up for this webinar, we will send you out an email with those answers in a few days. So thank you very much for attending this live panel. We'll have another one in about a month's time, so look out for that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.